welcome to In the News for February 25th, 2022. I am Brett Burney from appsandlaw.com.
This is Jeff Richardson from iPhone JD. Good morning, Brett.
Jeff, I feel like I should say happy Mardi Gras, or it's coming, right? This next week.
We are in Mardi Gras. It is not coming. It is here. We had parades last weekend. We had parades during the week. I was out late last night with friends and family. And the big day is next Tuesday, Mardi Gras Day. But Mardi Gras is not one day. Mardi Gras is a season. And we are definitely in the season right now. It's been a good one, especially after not having one last year.
Yeah, it's an extended celebration. I loved your first paragraph here where you were talking about the rare occurrences when Mardi Gras has been canceled, or I guess, it may be postponed. Just interesting, like 2 out of these, 5 or 6 that you had put in here, were because of other sicknesses, the yellow fever outbreak, and you said, the so-called Spanish flu, and of course the wars, World War I and II and Korean War, that kind of a thing. But just very interesting. I'm so glad you put that in. It's what an exciting time.
From a historical perspective, it's interesting. You basically either had to have war or a pandemic. And unfortunately, we have a little bit of both going on right now, the only one from the United States. But goodness gracious, yes.
So, plenty of masks at Mardi Gras, but you had a quick story here where you don't have to wear your Mardi Gras mask in an Apple store, apparently. Apple stores, the physical Apple stores, are dropping their mask mandates now, which I liked how you put it here, Jeff, in your post today. That's a pretty good sign that maybe things are getting a little bit back to normal if the Apple stores are not requiring them anymore.
Yeah, I feel like throughout the pandemic, the Apple stores have sort of been like the canary in the coal mine, right? When you had different cities around the country that would start to either close down or impose mask requirements, you're like, wow, I know that COVID's pretty bad in those cities. And sure enough, a week or 2 later, you would see it. And Apple does a very good job with logistics in all parts of the company, whether it's making iPhones or deciding when it's safe to open stores. So I saw that as a very promising sign. Looking forward to the day when we don't have to be wearing these masks as much anymore. So, we definitely have a mask mandate here in New Orleans through Mardi Gras, but they've already said that when Mardi Gras is over, it's going to be changed substantially. So look forward to the world opening up again.
I like this. This is Mark Gurman, who we know both as a reporter at Bloomberg and as an individual. I think he's got a newsletter, right? He is one of the top names in sort of the Apple-related rumors, right?
Yes, anything going on at Apple, he seems to figure it out. Absolutely.
And I appreciated that Bloomberg included a picture from one of the Apple stores in Columbus, Ohio. I've been to that Apple store many, many times. It's a couple of hours away from me, but
is that you right there in the picture? I can't.
Yeah, it could be. It could be because I have been there several times on that. Great. Okay, so one of the things you can get at an Apple store is one of the MagSafe batteries. You just had a quick link here to our friend David Sparks, which how long has he been using it now? 6 months. He's had a MagSafe battery for 6 months. And I like the fact that he now has a little bit extra time now, that he gave us a little bit of a check-in after 6 months. Does he still like the MagSafe battery? And the answer is?
And yes, indeed, he still does. We talked about this product on the podcast, 6+ months ago, I guess, whenever it came out. And I was really intrigued by it because I loved the idea of a small portable battery that you can just, slap on. You don't even have to plug it in. Just slap it on the back when you want the power and take it off when you don't. And frankly, I assumed that I was going to get one. And I guess it's just been because my battery on my iPhone has been so good that I really, plus I haven't been traveling as much. So I guess it's a combination of both of them. But I have been in so few situations where I really needed extra power during the day that at least when I didn't have easy access to, lightning connection or something. So I haven't got one, but maybe at one point in the future I will. I still think it's a nice product. I agree with him that it probably is a little overpriced. I wish it was like 50 instead of 100, but it's a nice product that for folks that if if you need to have easy portable batteries with you all the time, it's a nice one.
Yeah, for folks that are just listening, this is, I don't even know the dimensions here. I think of it almost like a little hand warmer, right? If you can buy those little electric, battery powered hand warmers, but it just kind of slaps onto the back of your iPhone 12 or 13. And he says he loves it. It's a nice item to have to top off your battery, right? If you think that there's going to be an issue, or he talks about it, of course, as we know, David likes to go to Disneyland quite a bit, but he says that his wife and him, they'll swap it, between themselves, depending on who has the longer day. And as you mentioned, his complaint was only on the cost of it, $100, and they might sell a lot more if they brought that cost down. But that's typically probably not what Apple usually does, and I'm sure they're still quite a number of them, even at the $100 mark. So that's good stuff. You should be able to use a MagSafe battery even with the iOS 15.4 coming out. My goodness, I think we have talked about this for the last 4 weeks on the podcast, Jeff. But you keep finding more stuff that people are finding out about 15.4. This is iOS 15.4 and iPadOS 15.4. They're in beta 4 now, which, again, I think we said this every week. We're getting closer. It's almost going to be out, but people just keep finding new stuff. And this one was a brand new Siri voice, which I found interesting. Voice number 5, which for some reason keeps making me think of that song Mambo number 5. Not the same thing, but a new Siri voice. We'll see if people like it or not.
Yeah, and it's the second time in 2 years that Apple has done this with one of the mid cycles, not when 14 comes out or 15 comes out, but with one of the mid cycles a year ago, or maybe it was 2 years ago.
Right.
I think it was a year ago, that what Apple did is they said that no longer is Siri going to be the default female voice, at least in America.
Right.
There may be some countries where it defaulted a male voice, I forget. But in America, it was always a default female voice. But as of about a year ago, when you are first setting up your device, you need to choose the voices, and they're not labeled male, female, any ethnicity or anything like that. They're just numbers, so that it's generic now. And you choose it. And of course, you could pick one that was a traditional, more female sounding voice. You could pick one that was a more male voice, and you could also pick, different dialects and stuff like that. But what's changing apparently when 15.4 comes out, which I think is going to just be in a few weeks, is we will have a fifth voice, which is gender neutral. And there was a sample of it on Macworld that I linked to, and it's a very pleasant sounding voice. But I completely agree; it doesn't sound predominantly male or female. It's just a generic voice. And so, I like the fact that it's just one more step of personalizing your device. But if you prefer to hear something that's more male or more female or more neutral, it's nice to have all those different choices. And this one, of course, was recorded, or not of course, but it was recorded by a member of the LGBTQ plus community. So it's, perhaps will appeal to to those folks. But that's great. Nice to have more choices.
It's also worth noting, and one of the stories does it here as well. This is for the American group of voices, right? There are quite a number of other voices. If you've ever gone into your settings on your iPhone and looked around, they're very interesting. Most of us just leave it as that default Siri, or what used to be the default Siri voice, right? Which is this voice that we kind of always know. It's been with us for many, many years. I just remember several stories of the lady that recorded all of that. But you can go in. I know my wife has gone in, and she has a British male voice for Siri, which for some reason always makes me insecure every time that I hear that. I actually go in and I changed mine to an Irish female sounding voice.
Oh, that sounds interesting. I'm gonna have to try that.
It is, although it's kind of weird because instead of saying mobile, it's mobile, right? And anyway, it's just kind of weird and offsetting a little bit, but it makes me perk up and pay attention just simply because it's a little bit different. Now I'm distinguishing between what we would typically think as male and female voices. And like you mentioned, now they just have it, the voices numbered. But it is fun every once in a while. Every few months or so, I'll go into the Siri settings and just play around with the different voices and kind of see if there's anything that catches my fancy. And sometimes it's nice to make a little bit of a change on that. So
the lady that you referenced a while ago was Susan Bennett, who recorded. She didn't know she was doing it at the time, but she recorded the original sounds, which became the original Siri voice. And a couple of years later, there would be interviews of her, and it was interesting because it's not exactly her regular speaking voice, but she could very easily slip into the voice. And it's like, oh my goodness, I'm hearing Siri, but I'm looking at you. It was weird. Very sort of weird. And they have tweaked what was the default female voice for Siri over the years. So it's no longer exactly like her voice. It's different now. But
you're right. I do remember those interviews. Like she's sitting there and it's like you now can finally put like a face to this voice that you knew, and it was a little off-putting, to be honest with you, but it was just neat that she finally got some of the recognition, because my goodness, it's a voice that we all hear quite a bit.
And this is important because I think more and more in the future, the idea of our technology talking to us, one day everything in our house will probably be talking to us. So it's something to think about. What decisions do you make in terms of what kind of voices do you use and how do you label them? It's interesting.
You had a post a link to a post, Jeff, about a product that I don't even know if many people even know about any longer. My goodness, and maybe for good reason, because I had no idea that Apple's iPod Touch is 1,000 days old of today. Just some of these numbers in here. This was May 2019 when Apple unveiled the latest iPod Touch. I feel like we may even need to explain to our audience what an iPod Touch is, because it looks like an iPhone and people would just probably assume that it's an iPhone, but it's amazing. This is like Apple's oldest product, I think is what they said, right? This is one of Apple's oldest products that they are still selling, the iPod Touch.
Yeah, and the reason for this article is that it had not changed in 1,000 days, but it actually goes back even further than that because it was a minor tweak back then. I mean, this design has not changed in a long time. When I think of the iPod Touch, I actually think of the earliest days of when I started the iPhone JD website in 2008, because at that time, you know, we used to say if you want a phone in your iPhone, we'll just get an iPhone. But if you don't need the phone feature, like there were some people that were still using some different type of phone that they had been using for a while, but they wanted to be able to try out apps or something like that. The solution was, well, just get an iPod Touch, and that way it doesn't have the phone in it. You can't make phone calls. But you can still, you know, use the apps and everything else. And it was even thinner. And so it was nice. It was super, super light. It was also a very popular device for kids if you wanted your child to have something, but not necessarily have a phone in it. But nowadays, I really don't hear of folks using it at all. I suppose that's why Apple hasn't changed it. So now it's just sort of hanging on. It's one of the few devices Apple makes that still has a headphone jack, as you said, if you want to have jack. But
interesting.
Yeah, it's an interesting relic of the past that you can still purchase today.
One of those scenarios is pretty much the only thing that I think of, Jeff, is like for kids, right? I remember several years ago when the iPod Touch was maybe a little more popular or people knew about it. This was the device to get the kids. It could connect to Wi-Fi. You could use text messaging apps and everything as long as you had Wi-Fi. It just didn't have a cellular radio in it.
Right.
But people could listen, the kids could listen to music because theoretically, it was the evolution of the original iPod, but they call it an iPod Touch because it basically looks like an iPhone with a screen that you can tap just like you do on the iPhone. But a lot of this would be great for kids, or if you just wanted a small device, like kind of similar to what you were saying, for home or for the office, where you could, use it to maybe, I guess, control certain other products, or, just be able to listen to music, that kind of a thing. But wow, I mean, I guess it still makes sense for Apple because they must still be selling them. They wouldn't have it available. It's the least expensive. It's only $200. So a brand new one, that is. And it still has a headphone jack, like you're saying. So I'm sure there are some people out there that still like it. If you're one of them, let us know, because it would be interesting to hear what people are doing with it these days.
One thing that makes me smile, Brett, is the picture you're showing on the screen of the back of the device right now. It says iPod right there, which is interesting because, that name iPod, there was a time when it was king, right? In the mid-2000s, that was like the big hit brand. And I remember, I'm sure you do too, that when the iPhone first came out, there was an app on the iPhone called iPod. It was the iPod app, and it's what controls your music. And of course, it's not called that anymore. Now it's just called music. But there was a time when those four letters iPod, really meant something important. And and now not so much. But it's interesting.
I thought about that too. Like I remember having it was the Diamond Rio was the first MP3 player that I had, and I think it had like literally 32 megs of space on it.
That's what I had too.
I longed for an iPod of any kind, really. So anyway, hey, good going on the iPod. Keep it up as long as you can. We still love the fact that Apple has you there, and keep on keeping on. One of the newer products we have actually mentioned before, and because I think it came out in January, a month and a half ago or a couple of months ago at the CES. This is a company called Chipolo, not Chipotle, Chipolo, that they developed a credit card sized Find My device, right? Now we've talked about this a couple of times. I remember last week we talked about David Sparks created a little card that he could fit, and he cut a circle out of a card so he could fit an AirTag in, so he could put it in his wallet. But Chipolo has created this little card spot that looks like a credit card, a little bit thicker. I think you can explain, it is still a little bulkier than a regular credit card, but The biggest thing is it connects to Apple's Find My network without having to have another app, without having to sign on to another service. It's already built in. And this was a great review that you linked to by Julie Clover on Mac Rumors.
Yeah, it's an interesting device. The company Chipolo has been making trackers for a while, much like another company out there called Tile has done.
Right.
But one of the things that Chipolo did is they realized Apple's, the Find My network is so powerful because iPhones are everywhere. And so what they had did is they still sell their own products. For example, they sell a product called the Chipolo Card, which works with their private network. But the Chipolo Card Spot is the one that works with Apple's Find My network. So of course, the chance of you locating a lost item goes up dramatically when you tap into Apple's Find My network. So, good on them to sign into it. And the device itself, it's the size of a credit card. It's the thickness of 3 credit cards.
Yeah,
so it's going to add a little bit of bulk to a wallet that you would put in your back pocket, but less than, like you said, what David Sparks was talking about last week was that device that he purchased that had a hole for an AirPod in it, which doesn't an AirTag. I should get all my Apple words in it, which doesn't really make sense. So this would actually make sense in a wallet, and especially, a wallet you put in your back pocket, it would take up a decent amount of space. If you carried around a purse or a bag or something like that, that you had like a slightly bigger wallet, well, then I think this makes good sense because it could just slip right in there. So whether it's that or some other device, some other product that you have that's thin and small, and you just want to have the idea of something small in there that you can still track, this looks like a pretty good solution.
I believe it's available for pre-order, or maybe you can get it now. Oh, pre-order now, currently sold out, of course. Again, one of the reasons that we do keep talking about this is because these are third-party companies that are making devices now that lock onto the Apple Find My network. Similar, I know we keep hounding on that, but that is such a significant component that I think is gonna kind of have a booming market around yet another Apple service, right? Like several other things here. But this was announced. I know a lot of people were talking about it. I remember we've also talked about a backpack that is similar. We'll have some similar tracking capabilities in there. This is a great review by Julie Clover. We'll have a link in here. I think she says that it even does better on tracking a wallet than an AirTag, at least from her use, and I think because it fits in there. It's not fully waterproof. I think she mentioned, it's water resistant, so it's good. I think all of us have lost either a wallet or a pocketbook or something in our lives, and just the fact that not only can we have the card spot, but one day I feel like it's going to be tiny microchips that are going to be built into probably wallets that we buy, and it's just going to be great that we have this coming. So good stuff, good link.
One more thing worth mentioning on this: it's both good and bad news. The good news is it's inexpensive. It's $35, I think. The bad news is you cannot replace the battery, unlike
that's the other thing she said. You're right.
So when it dies, you need to replace it. And she put in here how long it. She says it lasts for up to 2 years. So there you go. I have been using my AirTags. Gosh, when did they come out? Has it been 2 years yet? But I have not yet had to replace the battery on them, even though Apple did say that you'd have to replace the battery every year. So I'm expecting at some point I'll have to replace the battery, but I think it's just like the little CR232s or one of those small little watch batteries that you can get for inexpensively. So whenever that does happen, I will be able to swap out the battery. I have a little package
right here, right?
There, very handy of you.
2032. You got to have a bunch of those now.
So that's just something to keep in mind, is that you'll have to replace it at some point, but.
I remember us talking about that because Apple doesn't normally provide little devices where you can replace batteries.
Oh, that's very rare. I agree.
That was a pretty big deal with the AirTags, and so it's interesting. She does point out, and I'm glad you mentioned that here, that you can't replace the battery in this Chipolo Card Spot, but they say that when the entire thing needs to be replaced, if you register the Card Spot, Chipolo will send you a 50% discount code for a new Card Spot after 2 years, and then they'll recycle the old one for free. So good on them.
Yeah, that's absolutely a good way to handle it.
Maybe not the greatest, but hey, for $35, I think if you get 2 years out of it, that's fantastic. A couple of other stories you linked to have to do with something that I know we've talked about quite a bit with Apple and their focus on health, the health initiatives here. There were a couple of things that you mentioned, which I just thought you linked to were great. The Apple Watch blood oxygen sensor, which I think is on the Apple Watch 6 and 7, and then an interview that you linked to that we'll talk about in just a moment. But this was a good story here too that just amazes me continually what the Apple Watch can measure. Now, again, it's not a full-on medical device, right? And Apple always gives those warnings there, but it's just like more and more things that this Apple Watch is being able to measure for you, for individuals, from a health perspective. It's great.
Yeah, if you got one of the new Apple Watches, it's worth taking a look at this article. It's Graham Bauer at Cult of Mac that we'll link to. He talks about the blood oxygen sensor, which is it's one of the less obvious to me in terms of how it works.
Right.
And I have to admit, although I knew it in general what it was doing, when I read this article, it just reminded me of a whole bunch of things that this thing is checking for and stuff like that. So it's worth knowing what these devices can measure. So I recommend looking at that article. And going into the other link, I mean, it was a video interview with Dr. Sumbul Desai from Apple, who we've talked about her in the past. She's really interesting because she was a computer programmer in college, and then she ended up working for ABC News, and then worked for Disney, and then became a doctor. And I think she's primary care doctor, but she's now vice president of health at Apple, although she also has a practice too. And she shows up in a lot of these Apple videos discussing their health initiatives. And this interview that Rene Ritchie did with her, I thought was really interesting because she talked on, what Apple's goal was, trying to figure out what Apple can figure out about your health from its devices, primarily, of course, the Apple Watch. But what Apple can learn, and then how Apple can turn that into actionable information that you can actually do something about. Well, of course, you want a warning. If you can get a warning, that would be great. But also just a way for you to get information that can help you, just to keep better control of your health. So it was really interesting to hear her perspective because it provides an insight into how Apple makes its decisions going forward on these devices.
Listening to this, we both of us have talked about quite a bit about how Apple does raise that aspect of a health. Like it's almost, I don't think it would be too far from the norm to say maybe in a couple of years that Apple is becoming a health company. I mean, people have already said that a little bit. I know that sounds a little crazy to folks, but just the things that they're putting into not just the Apple Watch, but even, they're talking about incorporating some things into the AirPods and of course onto the iPhone. It's amazing how this is becoming like health products, not just the technology side on there. This is a great interview that I just found it interesting. I guess she maybe confirms a few things that we've suspected, that health is a major focus, but they work very closely. The health department, I guess, at Apple works very closely with the design department. And of course, Rene, toward the end, I think he asked this question about what about privacy, right? We're always concerned about that. And Apple has an amazing focus on the privacy aspects. And she goes through and talks about how all the information is only stored on the device. It is only shared with like your primary care physician if you allow it to be shared. Like you have to opt into all of that. And so even Dr. Sumbul talks about the fact that people come to her and say, hey, Apple, you got all this EKG, ECG, information about me. That must be great. You have so many people. And she says, we don't keep any of that. Like we don't have access to any of that. It's all on the device. And it was just really nice to hear her perspective on just the entire process that they go through, even from the regulations that, of course, they have to surmount on this, with the design, with the functionality, and with the focus on privacy as well as the health. Really, really nice. About an 18-minute interview here from Rene Ritchie.
You know what it reminds me of, just listening to you say that, is when Apple starts in the late 70s, but really Apple comes to prominence in the 80s and then the 90s. It's a computer company, right? It was in the name, Apple Computer.
Right.
And then it was in the early 2000s when, although of course Apple still made the computers, but suddenly music became such an important part of so many things. We were talking about the iPod a few minutes ago, the iPod, and everybody was buying music on iTunes, which was a brand new thing that you could buy an individual song instead of buying an entire album and get it instantly digitally. The idea that you had your iPod to carry, everything about Apple was really, or it was such an important part of the company, was doing things with music. And I feel like we're seeing the same thing with health now. It's, the Apple Watch is a big part of it, but so is the iPhone. And it's all different technologies, different services that Apple is really trying to say, what can we do with health? And it's a tricky one because I'll unlike music, where I guess music's tough too, because you're dealing with record labels and artists and stuff like that. But in the health, you've got those privacy concerns you talked about, like HIPAA, privacy in the United States, and you've got all of the regulatory things. I mean, can you say that a device is doing something, even though you think it's doing this, but unless you've gone through a rigorous test process, that government agencies won't let you actually say that it's doing this. So it is not an easy space to be in. But Apple can do some really cool things with these devices that are, Tim Cook calls the Apple Watch the most personal device because it's attached to your body at all times. So it's interesting to see this sphere, this additional sphere of health that they're getting into, and that there are major things planned that we're going to be seeing, 1 to 5 years in the future in this area.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you mentioned that. We talked about a few weeks ago. I recently read Becoming Steve Jobs, the book about, I think it was a reporter from Fortune magazine or so, that he was just giving sort of a biography. But you're right. In those early days, Jeff, it was going through how Steve Jobs was looking at, like, okay, not just music so much, but that became the primary focus, but like digital media, like they knew, and Steve Jobs kind of positioned the company through many bumps and ups and downs, but it's like, okay, we've got to focus some of the products, and exactly about the iPod, just like we were talking about. And you're right, this could be sort of the new thing. One phrase that the doctor here, she's an Apple vice president, by the way, of health, but she mentioned actionable information. And I loved that because she said that their goal is they want to provide the user with actionable information about their health. Right. And both Renee and Dr. Desai here, talked about a couple of examples where people were falling down, or there was an irregular heartbeat, or there was just information that gave folks at least a heads up, like maybe you should just go and check this. Right. Don't rely just on the data that you're getting, but go call a doctor, just go and check this out. Like, this could be something, maybe it's not. And if it isn't, it's okay. But it's something that you should check out. By the way, I didn't even know this on here, but I was listening to another podcast. In the health app on the iPhone, it actually measures your walking speed and your gait analysis. I didn't even know that. And also, we've got a second floor in my house here, so it actually measures like how fast you go upstairs and how fast you go downstairs. So this morning I was comparing my speed and my walking gait with my daughter and my wife. I didn't even know some of this was in there. Like, so much of this information that's only stored on my phone is being tracked, and that it's really neat. Like, I didn't even know you could analyze your walking gait to know if like that helps with understanding your better mobility or not. But there's so much in here in this health app that like it's already almost a little overwhelming, but it's just going to keep getting better.
I suspect that was the Mac Break Weekly podcast from this week, because I heard it too.
Was.
And I had the same reaction. Exactly. I had the same reaction, but when they were describing it, I didn't even realize that those things were being measured on my iPhone. In fact, I got to go take a look at it. And
let's compare. We'll see how
my walking gait is. Exactly.
I'm just under 3 miles an hour apparently on my typical walking gait, but it's great because my wife has always complained that I walk too fast, and like now I can analyze it. Like, I can quantify, I can compare with her. Maybe not such a good thing, but and can I just quickly also add, this is a jump on. We've talked about this. You in Louisiana, I know you have a specific app for even your vaccination card. But I just, over this past week, learned that I can connect my health app on my phone with my, my clinic, or the hospital that I go to has a health portal, like many of us do. And when I opened my health portal on my computer, I had a QR code that I could scan on my health app. And guess what? It added my vaccination record into my Apple Wallet. Now, we've talked about different apps and different things to do. In Ohio, we haven't had a specific app. California's had some, and some other states. But Jeff, it was so easy, and I'm just glad to have that instead of having to take that paper vaccination card around, which is what I had to do. I now have it in. It's just a simple little card in my Apple Wallet that tells the dates that I was vaccinated and boosted, and it has like the location and the kind of vaccination that I got, and it has a QR code so that people can scan. If I need to show it to a restaurant or something, people can scan it. So I'm just saying, like, to me, I'm just realizing how much this is a focus of Apple, and there's so many things swirling around this that, again, it's just going to keep getting better.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Let's go to In the Know. Here is a tip. I think I mentioned last time I have right now going some. It's mostly for lawyers and legal practitioners. It's iPractice on an iPad. It is a series of 3 courses that I have going. And one of them is about managing files on the iPad. And I keep realizing I think this is one of those things that, Jeff, you and I know about because we're a little more nerdy on this end and we know about this, but I realize most people don't know. Today you can connect an external USB hard drive, or like a thumb drive, a USB thumb drive, directly to your iPad. So if you've got a thumb drive with some pictures, or somebody took pictures, or you've got some music on it or something, then you can actually connect that to your iPhone or your iPad, and you can copy those files from the hard drive onto your iPad and iPhone. Now, the way I just described it seems like it's very easy to do. And it is that easy, but there are several caveats just to be aware of. Probably first and foremost, when people think about it, like, I think I've got a USB thumb drive here, but most of the times when we say USB, we think of what most people know today as USB-A. That's like the small little rectangle thing. And as you all probably know, if you have an iPhone or an iPad, you don't have a USB-A port on your computer or on your device. I don't even have it on my computer anymore. You probably either have a Lightning port, or if you have an iPad Pro, you have a USB-C port on there, which is a little bit smaller and kind of almost like an oblong, if you will, if you look at it really closely. So if you have a thumb drive that has USB-A, you're going to need an adapter in order to get it to plug it into your iPhone or your iPad. Now, depending on what kind of a device you have, Apple sells I think they call it the Lightning to USB 3 camera adapter, which tells you that should only be for a camera, and it is. That's what a lot of photographers use to get their pictures from their camera over to their iPad, but it can also work to plug in a USB thumb drive or a USB external hard drive, and you can copy files back and forth. If you have an iPad Pro that has a USB-C port on it, well, there's another adapter, a USB-C to USB-A adapter that you need. Or I find, in fact, I've got an external hard drive here that is USB-C, and some thumb drives I've seen today have a USB-C plug in it. So you can just plug that directly into your iPad Pro if you have a USB-C. The other couple of caveats quickly are really on the geekery scale here, but if it doesn't work for you, these could be a couple of issues. The thumb drive or the external hard drive needs to be formatted in a file system that the iPad can recognize. Most external drives today are formatted in one. There's several of them. Again, this is the really geekery stuff. It's either Apple file system or the Windows file system, but the iPad and iPhone can read both of them today. And then second, most of it works best if you have a USB 3.0 drive, and that really just labels the speed of it. Or if you have a USB 2.0, sometimes you have to have extra power to get into it. So I know it's a very simple thing, but there's a few caveats. Once you do plug it in, the Files app that comes free on the iPad and the iPhone will allow you to just see that little thumb drive in the Files app, and then you have access to it. You can copy files to it, you can copy files from it, and it just works beautifully on there. So if you want to know more, you can go to iPracticeOnAnIPad.com. You can see one of my courses there. Is about managing files, and I've actually got a little video on there that goes into a lot of detail, and I show pictures of what all of this that I'm talking about, because it's hard to follow it if you're not looking at it on there. But that's my tip: connecting external storage devices to an iPad or an iPhone.
One way that I use that is sometimes if I'm collaborating with somebody else and I need to share like a really huge document or a whole bunch of documents with them, sometimes it's just easier to share a USB key rather than, it's too big for an email attachment. And you could upload to something like Dropbox, but that takes some time. So sometimes this is really the best way to do things. So
absolutely. And even with Dropbox, a lot of times, I try to do that, but it's like, oh, I don't have a Dropbox account, right? Or like do OneDrive. And you're absolutely right, Jeff. This is almost like a lowest common denominator version, like almost a manual way to share those files. So good. Yeah, that's good. I'm glad.
Yeah. My tip today is just something purely entertaining and fun. There's a game that many people have been playing called Wordle, which was purchased by the New York Times. And I love Wordle. It's fun to sort of pick and I like the fact that every day you have a new puzzle and you can pick your things. So
this is great.
There's an infamous article from The Onion, which of course is a satirical publication, right? That I won't say the actual title because I don't want to curse on the podcast unnecessarily, but the title of it is F Everything, We're Doing 5 Blades. This is a 2004 article they did that at the time it was like as Gillette and other manufacturers of razors were putting 2 blades and then 3 blades, they thought it'd be funny just to say, fuck everything, we're going to go with 5 blades. And it was a hilarious article, which of course now they do make 5 blades. And sometimes when people think things, just having more and more sounds ridiculous, but then sometimes it actually makes sense. So with that in mind, Wordle, there have been some, they're not copies of Wordles. They're sort of,
I can't get away from Wordle now.
Well, exactly. Wordle's fun. So I saw one that was called Doodle or Durdle, which is actually 2 Wordle puzzles at the same time.
Okay.
And as you type in your clue, like whatever your word is, it will show up on both at once. So you're not just typing in words that are to solve one puzzle. You need to think about how your word is gonna help you on both the first and the second puzzle. So then if somebody did 2, somebody else came along and did 4 with Quordle, and then somebody else came along and did 8 with Octordle.
Oh my goodness.
And I have to tell you, at first you're like, well, this is just ridiculous to have 8 puzzles at one time. But I'll tell you, it actually makes, I think, the game better. And the reason for that is with Wordle, you're trying to be strategic with the words that you use for your guesses. Sometimes you're putting in a word because you actually think it might be the guess, right? But other times you're just putting in something because it's got a bunch of letters in it that you want to see if any of those letters hits. Well, that strategy aspect goes up to the nth degree when you have 2 or 4 or 8 game boards at the same time, because you have to constantly be thinking about, if I'm going to use this word here, maybe it helps over here. And when you're trying to figure out which one of those puzzles you want to guess, I may have a pretty good idea of what the third one is, but I'm not positive. But I want to guess the fourth one first because it's going to use some letters that I think might be in the third one. And so if I get the fourth one, then I'll know whether or not my guess is right in the third one. And there's a whole lot of strategy. The Quordle one is nice because I usually play them on my iPad, but you can play them on a computer too. On my iPad screen, you can see, you're showing Quordle right now. You can see all 4 boards at one time, which helps give you the big picture. I personally think the most fun of all of these is the Octordle one that has the 8 on it. And you need to scroll up and down to see all of the different boards. And it can make your brain hurt a little bit. But I'll tell you, if you know how to play Wordle, it will take you about 2 minutes to figure out how to play these other variants. And then if you're like me, I actually think that these are more fun because it has all of the strategy of Wordle plus a whole nother layer of strategy that you have to do. These things are fun and they're all free. And I'll mention that all of them that we'll link to all of them here. All of them have, like Wordle, they have a daily one. So you come back every day and you get that one puzzle of the day. But unlike Wordle, these also have an option that you can just play as much as you want. So if you want to sit there for 30 minutes and just play puzzle after puzzle after puzzle, you can go ahead and do that too.
I'm going to waste so much time.
They are fun.
This is great. I just before the New York Times bought the Wordle, which what a story! I'm excited. I want to read that story in a few weeks, I'm sure. But just before the New York Times bought Wordle, I'm like, okay, I got to try this just to see what all the hype is about. And I won in 3 tries. And I'm like, that's it. I'm done. I've done it. I win. And I never wanted to touch it again. But this is so fun. Now, this might get me back in. I didn't know we could do Dordle, Quordle, and Octordle. But man, that should be it. So you could do all of these once per day, right?
Yeah, or like I said, the other ones have an option that you can play as much as you want to.
Oh my goodness!
For people that, and it sounds like you are not one of these people, Brett, but for people that actually play Wordle, you have your favorite words that you like to start with, and like I noticed that you had one on the screen where your first word was green. That is a horrible first word, Brett. That's a horrible one.
Okay, I'm seeing. I don't know.
You had 5 letters that you could use to guess, and you made 2 of them in E.
Oh yeah, they're the same.
Why not choose choose a word that has 5 different letters.
Right.
So people have like their favorite, starting words and stuff like that. But when you're playing these games that have, and you have more chances to choose, by the way, it's not just the 6 choices you have in Wordle.
Yeah.
But when you play these other games and you have more chances, you're even more deliberate on which letters you're choosing. I could be geeking and talking about this for a long time. Suffice it to say,
I love it.
For those of us who like word games, this stuff's great fun, and it's free.
I feel like I want to win this one now. It's already but see, I can't. So the yellow means it's in the word, but it's in
there's an I in the word, but not in that space.
Okay,
so,
we'll stop. Yeah. I'll finish this offline because this I don't want to start cursing on the podcast either. It's like, come on, that's great. Thank you, boy. That's much more fun than connecting to USB thumb drives. I love it. Jeff, as always, thanks. It's so fun to talk with you every week, and we'll talk with you next week. Thanks again.
Thanks, Brett. Bye-bye, everybody.